Hello, once again, fellow geeks and comic enthusiasts. This video, this is my response to being tagged by SLEEPYREADER666. Damien, man, once again, I apologize. I didn't see this sooner, but like you, I was not on here for a couple, 3 weeks probably. This was my response to his tag. What comic are you most grateful to have in your collection? And that is a tough one because, I've been at this almost 40 years, so since the early 70s. I could have done the obvious and said, okay, well, it's my most expensive one, or it's the one that's got the key appearance by so-and-so, or, first appearance by this character, or, any kind of thing like that. But I thought about it, and I'm going to kind of turn this into a little ramble here about how I got started and some early comic memories and that sort of thing. But, like a lot of you when you were kids, let's say back in the day, everybody read comics. Every little corner store and grocery store and drugstore had a comic rack or had a magazine rack where they had just, all kinds of comics. So, and I was like everybody else. My cousins read comics and my friends read comics. And, I had 3 older cousins that were all girls, sisters, and they had a pile of Archies, so I probably started out reading Archies. Somebody might have some Sergeant Rock and some Black Hawk and Sergeant Fury. They were in the war comics. Some other guys had Spider-Man and the Avengers. Other guys are into the DC stuff. So I had another cousin that had like a big steamer trunk. It was just like piled full of comics. They were like real ratty shape, but we just kind of traded back and forth. Roll them up in my back pocket and take them to school, hide them inside my binder, my notebook, anything where I'd get to read comics. But the reason I'm picking this book, or these books, is because these are the ones that really made me first really notice comics and think about, something that I want to, that was something I wanted to continue to do, was read and buy comics. There used to be this little store in the same town where my mom used to work, and it was called Maloney's. And it was like a little block building, kind of dank and dark, and I'm sure, a lot of guys can relate to this. You go in and they just have the tables like, they'd have the clothes piled on a table and some shoes piled on a table, just a little mishmash of everything. Well, it had a little basement. You go down the basement, and that's where it had like the toys and kids' clothes and all that kind of stuff, and they had like a comic rack. Well, back then, I guess it was around 72, they would have these 3-packs. So, you're getting a bargain. Okay, 3 comics for 59 cents. Okay, the comics were 20-cent cover price, so you're getting that big bargain of a penny. But it, really made it look good. But that was probably the first time I'd ever bought superhero comics, because I bought all the, stuff you read when you're a kid, when I was a kid, and some of you others, like the Richie Rich and the Sad Sack and the Archie and, the Gold Key stuff and Donald Duck and all that. And this is the first time I'd ever really bought a superhero comic. So, I'm going to assume this is not cheating here, because all these books were in one pack, and I just bought them, pulled them off the shelf. But there's, historically wise, there might be some significance to a couple of them, but mainly, these are important to me because they really got me started, being interested in comics and starting as a hobby. There's a few more I can mention too, and I might do that in a later video, but these are the earliest ones that I actually bought and that I remembered, that I wanted to read more of this stuff. So all these came in a 3-pack for 59 cents. Now, this first one, Shazam number 5. Okay, this is I think this is like a couple years before the show was actually on TV. And of course, if you were a kid back in the 70s, you watched Shazam, Captain Marvel. And so I said, well, this is pretty cool. So I picked it up, and the stories were kind of simple. This was after DC got the rights to do Captain Marvel. DC and Fawcett had been in a big lawsuit in the 50s over Captain Marvel being too much like Superman, you know. So I think essentially DC won that lawsuit, and later on it was kind of funny because, you know, they acquired the rights to all Fawcett's characters, you know, Captain Marvel Jr., Mary Marvel, you know, Spy Smasher, you know, all that stuff. But the stories, I think they just were trying to continue like the simplistic look of this book, because I think they brought back C.C. Beck as the original artist, and but they actually had Denny O'Neil writing a lot of these stories. You know, guy that wrote Batman for years and Green Lantern, and you know, the cool thing about this book is you actually have a cameo appearance by Archie and Edith Bunker in it, and they actually look like, you know, the characters from All in the Family, and they called Archie and Edith. The last name's not mentioned for obvious reasons. They probably couldn't. But they actually make an appearance in a few panels, so it's a pretty cool story. Okay, the other one, Superboy and the Legion, number 197. And I guess one thing that's kind of significant about this, this is the first issue of Superboy where the Legion of Superheroes got the equal billing on it. So from 197 on through to, I guess, 258, 259 of that series, it was Superboy, you know, co-starring the Legion of Superheroes. This is a really good story, though. I think Dave Cockrum did the art in the first story. Great artist. You know, we lost him way too soon, but he had a really good run on Superboy. You know, later on, everybody knows him from X-Men, but he did several issues of Superboy and the Legion. And in the back, you have like a solo Superboy story drawn by Murphy Anderson. Another great. You know, anybody that's read a lot of the DC stuff, he did the old sci-fi stuff. I mean, he was Kurt Swan's inker on Superman for years. You know, they were so synonymous with each other on Superman, they started calling him, instead of Kurt Swan and Murphy Anderson, they started calling him Swanderson. But, you know, it's a great story in this book. Anybody that read the Legion as a kid, I mean, the Legion was really popular in the 70s and 80s. Not so much today. I mean, they're still publishing them. But I was always a big Superboy and the Legion fan, and I've got boxes and boxes of Superboy and Legion books. But this is, you know, none of these are the original copies, obviously. The Shazam book, my original, I Don't Know What Happened to It. I still have probably a couple more copies of this one, plus my original. But that was that one. And the third book in that pack, and I'm sure a lot of you that are Batman fans have seen this cover. This is kind of an iconic cover. Probably shown this book before, but this is Batman 251. And, of course, you got a great Neil Adams cover. I think it's Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams on the interiors. And this is really like my favorite Batman and Joker story. Joker's Five-Way Revenge was the name of this story. It was some of Neil Adams' best stuff, in my opinion. Like I said, I think I've still got my original copy, and it's got like probably a third of the cover out of it, but I kept it for sentimental reasons, just like the Superboy book. But these are the three that really got me interested in wanting to read comics, you know, and I bought a bunch of other stuff in between the time I bought this and really got into collecting. And later on, I think I picked it back up maybe like a year or so later, and I said, oh, I have to have these titles every month, you know. So those are the books that I guess I'm most grateful to have, because they got me started. You know, and after all this happened, I mean, every little every bit of money that I could come by, I mean, went to comics. I mean, I would, you know, I'm not sure I got a regular allowance per se, but like, you know, I went to the store with my folks, you know, we go to the grocery store or drugstore or whatever, you know, they'd let me get 2 or 3 comics, you know. And back then, every little corner store and drugstore, you know, had comics, so you could go in. And bad thing was, you know, I don't know how the distribution worked, but you couldn't find all the issues of your favorite titles all in the same place. I mean, you had to go to this store to get a couple of books, and you had to go to this store for a couple of books, and go to this drugstore to try to find something. And like one place would be mostly Marvels, and another place would be mostly DCs, and another place would be mostly the funny stuff, you know, the mystery and the war and the horror titles and all that. But that, you know, that was a lot of my favorite memories as a kid, was like, you know, scouting out all these stores to see who sold what, you know. and I might be rambling here. One of my favorite memories of comic collecting, I used to hate to get a haircut when I was a kid, because we'd go to this guy and he would give me what I would call the Mo cut. I mean, it would look like, somebody put a bowl on your head and they just shaved everything else that you could see that was showing. But we started going to a different barber, and I found out there was a couple drugstores just down the street, and one in particular, just like a couple blocks down. Like I say, I'm from Kentucky. Well, not originally from Kentucky. I'm originally from Tacoma, Washington. But, we moved back to Kentucky when I was a kid, so, I grew up in a pretty rural area. But like I say, every little store, had comics. But when we changed to the other barber, I kind of got smart about it, because, I saved my allowance money and money from mowing yards and maybe working on somebody's farm or whatever. Every little bit of change I had, I went to buy comics. So what, I wised up, so when I went to the barber, instead of fighting and said, God, Dad, I don't want to get a haircut, I would jump in the chair first. So that way, I get my haircut over with, I go down the street, hit the drugstore, and there were the comics, and they're just like, okay, I might have a buck or two. Back then comics were 20 cents, 25 cents, 50 cents, and 60 cents for the 100-pagers and the giants, the giant-sized marbles. And God forbid if you had enough money for a Treasury edition. But I remember going in that drugstore, and I was standing there, until the old man come got me. And I'd come up with my pile of books. And the little lady that was the druggist there, or that ran the store, she got to, know me pretty personally, and I was a regular customer. So, I didn't know what day the books actually come out. It was kind of course, now every Wednesday is comic book day, but back then it was, just depending on what store you went to, you might not get new books on the comic rack for 2 weeks, and I'd go back, well, where's so-and-so issue? Where's so-and-so issue? Because like in a lot of the DC and Marvel books, you'd have this little blurb at the end of it that would say, next issue on sale on April 16th or about April 16th, or the week of April 16th. So you didn't really know. And like I say, not every store that had comics carried everything that you wanted. So you kind of had to hit every drugstore and every, little mom and pop place. But I got to find out when the new books usually came in, the magazines, and back then they would like put them all in a stack, like the comics, the car magazines, the women magazines, whatever, bodybuilder magazines, and they put them all big stack, and they'd be all wrapped up in that, those hard plastic bands. So if she saw me come in, and the books might be sitting there, and they hadn't unbanded them and put them on the shelf yet, and I'd kind of look around, and she goes, "You want me to cut those open for you?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." So she would let me go through, and I don't know why then, but even then, I was like, well, I don't want the ones that's got where the band cut into the cover, or and of course I read all my comics, but in my head I was like, well, I want the best looking ones, So she would let me go through the stack, and I would pick out all, and of course there would be maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 copies of each comic that they had, and I would pick out the best one, and I'd go out there like, But those are some of my favorite early memories of comics. I'll tell you one more. One summer, I was probably 13 or 14, and I had saved up a bunch of money because I had found out that you could cut out these little ads and send in for catalogs. And everybody that collected back in the day knows what I'm talking about. You'd have the guys like Robert Bell, Passaic Book Center, Comic Sales. I mean, there's the same guys probably every month, and you cut out the little thing, and then you send them a quarter, and they send you a catalog. That was one of my favorite things, was getting a new comic catalog in the mail. But I had saved up probably $40 one summer, and I had ordered a bunch of books from this Passaic Book Center, and back then they were like 75 cents or buck and a half, like for very fine near mint, silver and Bronze Age books, So I had like Silver Age Avengers and JLA, and I had like the first 10 or 15 issues of Commandy all in near mint shape, and Strange Adventures, and just Tales to Astonish, just all this great stuff. Well, the books came in, and my dad was sitting out in the yard when the UPS guy brought them, or the mailman. And back then, the packaging sucked. I mean, you see some of the packaging that stuff came in years ago. It would have like that, like ground up paper or cardboard that was like the padding on the packages. You know, there was no cardboard or anything, so the comics came in and they were doing like this. You know, because I ordered about 60 or 70 books, and they came in one day, and my dad was out in the yard and he was sitting in a lawn chair, and he had this, and he's like, "What's all this?" And I'm like, "Those are comics ordered." He's like, "You spent all that money on comic books?" You know, and I'm sure some of you can relate. I was like, "Well, yeah." And he's like, "Well, why didn't you save it for something good?" You know, I was like, "Well, this is good to me." You know, what's funny about that? Years later, they have a thing in Kentucky in a couple counties just called Court Days, and all it is just like a huge flea market. You know, they take like a whole town, and on all the back streets is nothing but vendors. You know, selling antiques and, you know, all the junk you see at flea markets. You know, of course, it's not junk to everybody, it's stuff. But back then there used to be a lot of comic dealers, and this was after I'd grown up and moved out of the house. And my dad and I were like, we found a couple comic vendors, you know, and he says, "See if they got any old westerns in there," because he had read comics as a kid, and it kind of made me cringe, because I said, "What'd you read?" And I was like, "So, well, I read the westerns, and I read the war stuff. I read Black Hawks and Batman and Captain America." And keep in mind, you know, he was buying comics in the early 50s. So you can imagine, you know, near mint copies of all the stuff that he bought, and him and his friends traded around and wadded up, and, you know. But I found that out, I was like, oh gosh, if you just saved that stuff, you know. But I was looking through some old westerns, you know, and he said, "Oh, I used to read that. That's a Ynotart comic or a Tom Mix comic or something like that. Lash LaRue." He said, "How much they want for that?" And I said, $250. He's like, "Wow." I said, "It's a good thing you saved those comics, huh?" And I'm like, but that, you know, that's just, I'm sure a lot of you got some similar memories, you know, that collected years ago. That's just some of mine. I'll cut myself off before I get too far into this, but would like to say, you know, grateful to be a part of this community. Got some great guys out there. I appreciate everyone making the videos and the videos I've watched. Great stuff. I appreciate everyone that's watched my videos and made comments, and you know, people I've dealt with, you know, buying and trading comics. It's just a great little thing we got going here. But in response to that, I know, you know, that you guys have been doing this tag thing forever, and what was your first book, and, you know, all those questions, your top 10 and all that. But I'm kind of getting in on this late, so I'm going to tag a couple more YouTubers. Got a relatively new one on here. I'm sure some of you have seen her. His name is LahRasa. I think she's from the UK, and I think she's relatively new. So LahRasa, you are tagged. And also, a lot of you know our buddy Tony, Ynotart. Tony, I'm sure you've been tagged before, but now you've been tagged by me. I'd like to know the comic you're most grateful to have in your collection also. So LahRasa and Ynotart, you are tagged. But once again, glad to be here, guys, and onward and upward.